10 years ago, fresh out of my parents' place, I signed the lease on my first real apartment, a spacious two-bedroom flat in a modest neighborhood just blocks from a major university campus. I lived with one roommate, Maya, who, prior to becoming my roommate, was just a casual acquaintance from college. Maya kept mostly to herself, but she was easy enough to live with. At times, her boyfriend would also come live with us in the apartment. I had no problem with it, as long as they kept the volume down. I never got to see the boyfriend up close. I would mostly hear them talking in the kitchen. It was a brisk Tuesday night, roughly a month after we moved in, and I had met up with some old high school friends at a neighborhood pub downtown. By 11 p.m. I'd consumed a few too many drinks. Deciding I'd had enough, I flagged down a cab around 11:30 a.m. and headed back to the apartment. When I stepped through the front door of our building and climbed to our second-floor unit, I noticed Maya's bedroom door was firmly shut, a soft yellow glow from her room bleeding out from beneath a crack. I kicked off my shoes, walked down the narrow hallway to my own room, removed my makeup, and collapsed onto the mattress, ready for sleep. 20 minutes later, the apartment buzzer rang. Half asleep and disoriented, I checked the clock. It was past midnight. I ignored it, figuring whoever was downstairs had the wrong apartment. A few seconds later, the buzzer rang again, then a third time, sharp and insistent. Maya probably left after I came home. I assumed she had either lost her keys or her boyfriend had came, which he usually did if they had planned the night together. Annoyed, I shuffled out of my room, walked to the intercom panel near the stairs, and pressed the talk button. "Who?" I muttered. Young Men's voice answered back, crystal clear through the static. "Hey, I'm Maya's boyfriend. Is she up?" Assumptions confirmed. I thought that Maya might have fell asleep while waiting for him to come. So I pressed the door release button, heard the heavy exterior latch click open downstairs, and figured I'd let him in so he could go to Maya's room. My biggest mistake was that I left without even seeing whether he was coming in, since my brain was not working properly due to lack of sleep and alcohol. A minute passed, but I didn't hear footsteps climbing our stairwell. Irritated, I pulled my room door open and stepped out and looked down. Our apartment front entrance featured a glass opening in the door framed by wrought iron, offering a clear view of the vestibule. Standing right outside the glass was a college-age boy with wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a heavy canvas jacket. I had never seen Maya's boyfriend up close before in my life, but he didn't look dangerous. I leaned over the stair railing. "Hey, you can come on up, she's in her room." He looked up, offering a tight, polite smile. He pushed the exterior door open, stepped halfway into the building lobby, and then stopped dead. I knew something was wrong. A sudden, freezing jolt of primal dread slammed into my chest. Before I could process the warning siren screaming in my head, I heard the heavy exterior door click shut behind him, followed immediately by the sound of heavy, rapid footsteps sprinting up the concrete stairs from the ground floor. I spun around and bolted back toward Maya's room. Rounding the corner of the stairwell, I looked down, and there was another man. He lunged onto the landing. His hair was long and greasy, falling over a face hollowed out by sunken, frantic eyes. He wore a stained gray hoodie, and clutched tightly in his right hand was a jagged, heavy iron pipe. Adrenaline flooded my veins with blinding speed. I didn't try to unlock the door. I threw my entire weight against it, shoved it open, and screamed at the top of my lungs. "Maya, get up! Someone's coming in!" Maya's eyes opened instantly, the room light flashing across the hallway. Before she could even ask what was happening, I slammed her room door shut. From the hallway outside, we heard a heavy thud slam directly against her front door, followed by a violent rattle of the handle. "Open the damn door!" A raspy, furious voice barked from the other side. Maya grabbed her phone, her face draining completely of color. She dialed 911 in frantic, trembling strokes. I grabbed a study lamp from Maya's desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip, and backed up against the living room wall facing the entrance. For what felt like an eternity, we stood frozen in absolute silence. No more banging came. Just the faint sound of heavy, agitated breathing on the other side of the wood, followed a minute later by the sound of footsteps retreating rapidly down the stairs and the heavy front door slamming shut. We didn't move until the wail of police sirens echoed down the street, cutting through the quiet night air. When the officers arrived, they swept the building, checking the alley and the surrounding block, but whoever had targeted us was long gone. After we gave our statements, the officers shook their heads. He said to always confirm before opening doors, because criminals can make up anything to get in. Police guesswork that they probably had followed me back from the pub and used Maya's boyfriend information to trick me to open the door. Sometimes I do believe it's my mistake about openly yapping in public, especially when I'm drunk. I never found out what they were truly after, whether it was a robbery, a home invasion, or something far worse. But to this day, whenever a buzzer rings past midnight, my stomach drops right back to that terrifying landing. Growing up on a sprawling 10-acre property surrounded by dense pine woods and rolling crop fields was an exercise in absolute isolation. If you loved peace, quiet, and staring at endless horizons, it was paradise. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down a dirt road, and the closest town was a 30-minute drive. My parents bought the place when I was a kid, but I couldn't wait to escape. The moment I turned 19, bought my first used sedan, and saved up enough cash, I packed my bags and moved closer to the city. I'm not a nature hater, but the suffocating quiet of the countryside lost its charm a long time ago. When I was 16, though, that property was my entire world. Because my parents trusted me and my younger brother Leo, who was 10 at the time, they would occasionally leave us home alone for the afternoon. We both had chores, and I was fiercely protective of my little brother, acting as his self-appointed bodyguard whenever our parents ran errands in town. It was a blistering Saturday afternoon in mid-July. The house was massive, featuring a long wraparound porch, a finished basement, and a large metal storage shed sitting about 50 yards out back near the edge of the tree line. Leo was sitting on the living room floor playing video games on our old console, while I was lounging nearby, keeping half an eye on him. Suddenly, a loud, sharp metallic clang echoed from outside. It sounded heavy, like a steel latch slamming shut or a crowbar hitting metal. I immediately sprang to my feet and rushed to the front window, scanning the yard. Nothing. I sprinted to the kitchen window overlooking the backyard and my stomach dropped. The heavy sliding door of the outdoor storage building was wide open. It took a deliberate, heavy pull to open that door. It certainly didn't slide on its own. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Leo, stay right here. Do not move," I ordered, my voice dropping into a serious defensive tone. I bolted to the hall closet, grabbed my dad's stun gun, which did some damage, and checked the chamber. I marched out the back door and strode across the gravel yard toward the shed, making my presence loud and clear. "Who's in there?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly with adrenaline. Silence answered back. When I reached the threshold, I stood just out of arm's reach, peering into the dim interior. The shed was packed with a heavy-duty riding mower, an old ATV, and tall stacks of gardening supplies. Anyone could easily be crouched out of sight behind the equipment. Goosebumps crawled up my arms, feeling entirely out of my depth. I yanked the heavy door shut, threw the latch, and sprinted back toward the house. I bolted inside, locked the heavy wooden back door, and drew the deadbolt. Panting, I grabbed Leo by the shoulder and herded him into the living room, telling him to keep quiet. I sat on the couch with the gun across my lap, staring fixedly out the window at the storage shed, waiting for the door to slide open again. When nothing happened, I picked up the landline phone in the kitchen and dialed my dad's cell phone. No answer. So I left a breathless voicemail begging him to call me back immediately. I grabbed the phone, brought it back to the living room, and kept watch. To soothe our nerves, I turned the television on low so the background noise would break the heavy silence. Then I heard it. A faint, deliberate creak from the hallway ceiling upstairs. My blood ran instantly cold. Leo grabbed my sleeve, his eyes wide and wide with absolute terror. My protective instincts surged, overriding my fear. I whispered to Leo, telling him to hide behind the heavy armchair. Gripping the gun tightly, I crept toward the staircase. I didn't call out, shouting would only tell an intruder exactly where we were. I reached the top of the stairs and flicked on the hallway light. 5 wooden doors lined the corridor, 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. All of them were closed. The floorboard creak had come from the far end of the hallway right outside my bedroom. Moving on silent, shaking feet, I dropped to my knees and peered into the narrow, dark gap beneath the bedroom door. 2 bare, dust-covered feet were planted squarely on the floor inside, facing the door. My breath caught in my throat. The terrifying reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wasn't just investigating a strange noise anymore. There was a grown stranger standing inside my house, and I was just a kid holding a fake gun that I wasn't ready to use. Panic took over. I slowly scrambled backward, stood up, and bolted down the stairs, sweeping Leo up by the arm. We locked ourselves inside the small downstairs food storage area, turning off the lights and pressing ourselves against the wall. With trembling fingers, I dialed my dad's cell again, straight to voicemail. Finally, I hung up and dialed 911. Speaking in a frantic, ultra-low whisper, I told the dispatcher everything, that someone was inside our house upstairs, that we were hiding, and that my little brother and I were alone. The dispatcher instructed me to stay put, keep completely silent, and wait for the patrol units currently racing down our rural highway. Suddenly, heavy, unhurried footsteps began pacing down the stairs. They crossed the hardwood floor of the living room, moving directly toward us. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain whoever was out there could hear it. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A brief, agonizing pause stretched out. Then, a deep, raspy voice spoke right through the wood. "He is inside." The sound of that voice burned itself permanently into my brain. Even today, if I heard it, I would recognize it instantly. I froze, paralyzed by pure horror. Then, testing the knob, the man jiggled the handle, realizing the door was locked. I stayed quiet as the 911 operator instructions. I hugged my brother as I could hear his heart beating, as if like had run marathon. I clicked the landline phone as the dispatcher's voice said police is just a few minutes away. Outside the door, I heard the one man grunt in frustration and ask another man to bring something sharp to break the door. Before they had chance to break the door, police sirens started to ring from far distance. Heavy footsteps turned away, padding swiftly across the living room, followed by the violent slam of the back door. They were gone. Leo and I huddled together in the dark for what felt like hours until the sharp wails of police sirens echoed from down the long gravel driveway. When the deputies breached the house, cleared every room, and finally knocked on the storage room door to let us out, a crushing weight lifted off my chest. After searching the property extensively, they confirmed the intruder had fled into the woods. The police contacted our father and asked when will they be home. They arrived shortly after. To this day, the thing that haunts me the most isn't just the sheer terror of that voice outside the door, but that I thought that there was more than one man in my property. One outside distracting me and another inside of the house looking directly at me. When I was 22, I rented the basement apartment of a sprawling suburban split level owned by an elderly couple who spent of their winters traveling down south. It was cheap, gave me plenty of space, and let me live on my own terms without draining my savings. The lower level had its own private entrance around the back, a small kitchenette, a living area, and my bedroom beside the stairsway. The main floor of the house was separated from the basement stairs by a heavy wooden door that I kept bolted from my side. However, before leaving for a 2-week trip in mid-November, Friday night, and the wind was howling outside, rattling the double-paned windows, I had invited my friend Dave over to grab some takeout, drink a few beers, and watch football. Since the house was completely empty and isolated on a half-acre lot, we didn't have to worry about keeping the noise down. We cranked up the stereo, cracked open our drinks, and spent hours laughing in the living room. By around midnight, Dave was in no condition to drive back into town. Since the basement sitting room had folded couch that would turn into bed, he decided to crash with me rather than risk the icy roads. After tossing him a couple of spare blankets, I said my goodnights and went to my room, and locked the door behind me out of pure habit. Around 3 a.m., I snapped awake heavy creak from the wood from the main floor. Someone was walking upstairs, not in my basement apartment, but right above my ceiling. My initial assumption was that property was old, and heavy wind probably is causing some noise. Too tired to care, I rolled over and closed my eyes. Then came the second sound. The doorknob to stairway twisted slowly, turning all the way before hitting the internal lock and stopping. Someone was trying to get into my apartment. A chill shot straight down my spine, instantly wiping away every trace of sleep. I got up and I stared at the faint silhouette of the stair door handle. For 5 agonizing seconds, the knob jiggled again, as if testing to see if it would suddenly yield. Then footsteps padded softly away from the stairs. Fear warred with confusion. Who could it be? Silence. I waited another 10 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, before whispering my friends' names into the dark. No answer. Sneaking out into the hallway, I flicked on the living room light. Dave was fast asleep, snoring softly on opposite ends of the sectional, wrapped tight in their blankets. He hadn't moved an inch. Panic took over. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and tiptoed to the small basement windows, checking every latch. Everything was secured. Convinced I was just letting exhaustion and alcohol playing tricks on me, and blaming the old house's eccentric settling noises. I eventually forced myself back into bed, keeping a heavy metal flashlight within arm's reach. I didn't sleep another wink. The next morning, Dave woke up with splitting headaches. While he groggily packed up his things to leave, I casually asked if either of he had gotten up in the middle of the night. He of them looked at me, completely blank-faced, and swore they hadn't moved until morning. I spent the rest of Saturday running errands and trying to shake off the uneasy feeling clinging to the back of my mind. By the time I returned home that evening, the sun had fully set, casting long, eerie shadows across the property. I locked the back door, heated up some leftovers, and sat on the couch to watch a movie with the volume turned down low. At roughly 11:30 p.m., the movie paused on my screen as I heard it again. Footsteps. Not upstairs this time, but directly above the living room floorboards, moving deliberately across the main floor toward the basement stairwell. I froze, my spoon hovering inches from my bowl. The footsteps paused right at the top of the basement door. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of interior bolt turning. The door to the basement was opening. Without a sound, I bolted down the hallway, slammed and locked my bedroom door, and jammed a heavy wooden chair underneath the doorknob for good measure. My hands shook violently as I dialed 911, pressing the phone so hard against my ear that my knuckles turned white. I whispered frantically to the dispatcher, explaining that an intruder had just unlocked the interior door from the main house and was walking around my apartment building. The dispatcher kept me on the line, telling me units were already dispatched and less than 2 minutes away. As I sat crouched behind my bed, clutching the heavy flashlight, I heard slow, heavy footsteps walking down the basement stairs. They crossed the linoleum of the kitchenette, paused by the living room, and then began moving slowly down my hallway. Soft knuckles rapped twice against my bedroom door. Tears of absolute terror stung my eyes. I gripped the flashlight tighter, praying the locked door and the chair would hold. A heavy weight slammed against the wood, once, twice, making the frame splinter slightly. Then, flashing blue lights suddenly washed across my bedroom blinds, cutting through the darkness, followed by loud shouts echoing from the front entrance. "Police! Drop whatever you're holding and get on the ground, now!" A chaotic scuffle broke out in the living room, accompanied by shouting, heavy thudding, and the metallic clink of handcuffs. Within minutes, a frantic knock sounded on my bedroom window facing the backyard. "Sir, it's the police. You're safe to come out now." I moved the chair, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the hallway. 2 officers stood near the living room holding flashlights, while a third was escorting a disheveled, wild-eyed man toward the back exit in handcuffs. The man was wearing dirty clothes that didn't fit him, and as he was hauled past my doorway, he turned his head and stared right at me with a cold, dead-eyed glare that made my stomach churn. The lead officer walked over, breathing heavily, and debriefed me. He said that man seems to have some psychological issues and that it looks like he had been living out of the main house's guest rooms while my landlords were away. He had managed to slip in through an unlocked side window weeks prior and had been surviving off the pantry upstairs. The police found a makeshift nest of blankets, empty food wrappers, and stolen items stashed in the master walk-in closet upstairs.